Item number 1, ordinance to amend the municipal code as it pertains to the carrying of concealed weapons within the city and certain city buildings. Chief Olivo, Inspector Hahn.
Good evening. In front of you there's a draft proposed ordinance pertaining to this carry concealed weapon law. I suggest you maybe look at it in two parts. There's two areas that are covered in the one ordinance, and you may want to split your decision on how you handle this. But taking the first part is the request, a strong recommendation to adopt some city ordinances to cover specific forfeiture related violations of the new law. There's a number of violations of the new law that call for forfeiture only. There's a problem with enforcement of forfeiture crimes in general across the state. These type of crimes, police cannot make an arrest. The district attorney will not issue charges. What they are, basically, are civil matters. And in order to enforce a forfeiture violation in the state, you have to basically file a lawsuit. So, and in discussions with the district attorney, they are not prepared to proceed in that way for these types of violations. So we are asking for city ordinances to cover those specific violations that right now just have forfeitures as penalties. And that's the basic request of the first part of the ordinance. The second part is gives you the option to decide at this point if you want city buildings posted no weapons or not. The Milwaukee County Chiefs Association did make a recommendation to the ICC saying that we more or less prefer that city buildings are posted, specifically City Hall and the library. But I can say personally it's not a strong recommendation. I think there are good arguments, legitimate arguments, for not posting of city buildings. One being liability issues. The law calls for immunity from liability for any property that is not posted, so there's some issues there. And then there's the arguments again about what's safer, having a sign posted and having only the bad guys have guns versus everybody having guns, and there's that issue, that argument. Again, I believe there's arguments for both, and I believe it really comes down to a comfort issue. You know, what are you comfortable with? Your elected officials, you have to spend time here, deal with the public. You know our staff in the city. You know, what do you think is acceptable? I know that the librarian would extremely like to have the library posted. I can see her arguments, the fact that there's children in there, and she's concerned about the atmosphere it would create if people came in with guns. So I told her I would raise that concern. But I believe that it's really it's your decision. It's a comfort level decision. You know, do you want the buildings posted or not? And it's something you have to decide.
Honorable.
Could you give a couple of examples about the problem with forfeitures that you're talking about?
Well, again, so this has always been an issue in the state statutes. There's a number of crimes, not just dealing with carrying concealed weapon. A number of crimes that are just forfeiture related. And again, it's always been an issue with us that you can't make it a summary arrest for a forfeiture crime. You can't just arrest somebody if they're violating that. It's a fine only. And the district attorney, again, will not charge somebody with a crime because it's not a crime. It's a forfeiture, just a fine. And the process to enforce that for the district attorney is basically they have to file a civil lawsuit against the person. And a lot of these forfeitures, and especially in this case, are very nominal, $25 fines in a couple cases. So again, it makes it practically unenforceable. Now, I will say there is a bill pending in the state right now asking for that to be changed, asking for law enforcement to have the ability to actually make summary arrests for forfeiture violations. So that is out there, and that may make this, this case moot, but I think it's still a good idea to proceed, because, again, even if we do get the eventual authority to make arrests for forfeiture violations, it's always good to have the option of citing for municipal ordinances, because on many occasions, as it is right now, we will take state charges to the district attorney, and many times they make the choice not to prosecute, and then many times we will then follow up the city citation for that violation. And this would give us that option no matter what the state does. But again, the way the law is written now, with the violations for several of these violations, we wouldn't be able to enforce it at all at this point.
Okay, you saw the letter that we've gotten from a concerned constituent regarding us adopting this. From what I see from what we're adopting, we're basically changing our current law and adopting what the state has with this provision of a few buildings, which the state law already allows us to have that. In fact, it has some of the statements where it says, however, federal laws also prohibit firearms in certain parks and wildlife refuges, centers, government offices. The law also does not allow concealed carry of other weapons. So there are, in the state statutes alone, there are restrictions on buildings. Is that
The
correct?
law specifically names certain buildings that are prohibited by state law.
Tavern being,
No, taverns are allowed to have people, police departments, municipal courts, jail facilities, mental health facilities, schools are basically the buildings that are exempt by law. Everybody else, every other private property owner or public property owner, like the city, has the option to either post their building, no weapons, or not.
let's go back to tavern. It says no one may possess a handgun in a tavern unless they are a lawful enforcement officer, a correctional officer in the line of duty, or a member of the U.S. Armed Forces or National Guard in the line of duty. A private security person meeting certain criteria, a tavern's licensee, owner, manager, or an authorized employee or agent. Oh, it says or having a license.
Or
So
a
you can
license.
with a license.
Right.
That's the last part.
Alderman Skronsky?
Chief, I just have a couple of questions. If this ordinance is adopted, does this make this building any safer?
That would be all, I think, hypothetical. I think for every scenario or hypothetical case you could come where someone, the good guy having a gun would make the situation safer, you could probably find a scenario where you could make it unsafe. So I think over time we'll tell how this plays out. I can tell you that I believe in 6 months to a year, we're gonna get used to it, and it's not gonna be that big of a concern. But again, I think there's instances where not allowing guns would maybe prevent something from happening, and maybe in other cases might create a problem. I don't know, it's all conjecture at that point.
I would think at this point, if there's, with the ordinance as it would say, you put a 5x7 sign up on the door, if somebody has that much intent, the sign on the door is not gonna make any difference to them. Would I be correct in that?
I agree with you there.
And if that would be the case, would, in order to do that, in order to secure a building or buildings, you would have to have a law enforcement officer at the door, or a detector to find out if somebody's carrying anything, like the airports. I don't feel this would be any safer to protect the constituents by enforcing this ordinance. There are other communities that have not enforced this. It's no different than having the drunk and drive law that is out there, and that hasn't done anything different to stop people from driving drunken.